Kia ora, wā and greetings viewers. Welcome back to Darpa in the Mirror, a panorama of images New Zealand capturing you and the world around us. Now, Happy New Year's to you all. New Zealand has turned on a magnificent Kiwi summer for the last few days. It's been an absolute cracker. You can tell by just looking at me that I've been practically barbecued out in the sun. So it's been absolutely fantastic, and once again, Happy New Year's to you all. Now, today's show, viewers, is dominated by keynote speaker and British MP George Galloway. Now, George Galloway is renowned the world over for his stinging counterattacks in the defence of Islam. His purity, his unbiasedness, and his surreal words are thought-provoking and have accredited him with praise the world over. Now, he attracted a record crowd of over 1,200 people in 2 days in Auckland. Now, this in comparison and echoing the sentiments of Ram of his counterparts, which organised the Mosques and Miracles. These were a group of Australian Islamophobes, as Ram labelled, who were trying to incite race hate. Now, it is important before we cross over to George Galloway that as New Zealanders, as people in a global community, as a brotherhood, that we should be tolerant, accepting and understanding. These are the building blocks of the future. This is what will lay the path of the future generation. And what better example than to set it right here in Aotearoa. With those words, viewers, let's cross over to British MP George Galloway.
George Galloway, left-wing British MP and international peace campaigner, was here in Auckland last July to speak against Islamophobia at meetings organised by RAM, the Residents' Action Movement. A prime catalyst for the Voices of Peace meetings was the Mosques and Miracles tour, organised in New Zealand around the same time to spread the message of Islamophobia. The Mosques and Miracles tour has been inspired by a 400-page book of the same name, written by Australian right-wing Baptist pastor Stuart Robinson. Galloway defines Islamophobia as racism against Muslims. This new racism, says the British MP, is an inevitable flow-on from the deliberately misnamed War on Terror, begun by Washington to monopolise oil fields in the Muslim Middle East as part of the US state's strategy to remain the world's dominant power. As a prominent anti-war politician, George Galloway was targeted by a US black propaganda campaign in an attempt to blacken his reputation as a grassroots advocate. Falsely accused of being in the pay of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, Galloway demanded to testify before the US Senate in May 2005. There he turned the tables against the powerful elites profiting from death and destruction in the Middle East, putting them on trial for crimes against humanity. In March this year, British enforcement authorities admitted that George Galloway had no case to answer. Galloway is one of the West's most high-profile opponents of Islamophobia. In his Auckland meetings, Galloway pointed to the close link between America's wars in the Middle East and its state-fueled Islamophobia, which attempts to give ideological justification to Washington's unjust crusade for oil and power. Born in 1954 in Dundee, at the age of 26, he was chairman of Labour in Scotland. At 32, he was in the House of Commons, beating Roy Jenkins in Glasgow's Hillhead, a Tory stronghold for generations. He is an excellent orator who captures people's imagination and commands respect.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Fellow parliamentarians, distinguished guests, distinguished elders, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, wassalamu alaikum, peace be with all of you. I'm very grateful indeed for the warm welcome I have had in New Zealand in the 12 or 13 media interviews that I've done in this, the second of the major meetings and speeches that I've been able to make here in a whirlwind visit of just 3 or 4 days. It's a long way to come for a weekend, but I've enjoyed it immensely. And I want to begin by complimenting New Zealand. I have a national radio show on British radio every Friday and Saturday night, London time, between 10 in the evening and 1 in the morning. You can listen to it on the internet, as many people now do. around the world. More than 1 million people listen to this show every weekend, and I did it from Auckland this morning. And if you'd heard it, maybe some of you did, your hearts would have been warmed by the extent to which it is regarded as a universal truth that New Zealand is a peaceful and harmonious and decent society. Coming from a country now in the first ranks of the hated on the earth, coming from a country which more people now hate than have ever hated before, I would treasure that if I were you. I wouldn't let that reputation go lightly if I were you. And I make this point to the gentleman who perfectly constructively heckled Grant a minute or two ago. There is, of course, a dilemma in how to approach the emergence of the serpents of division and hatred in your society. You can ignore them in the hope that they'll go away, but I hope our friend will take from me in the spirit in which I intend it. It's rather easier to take that line of ignoring it in the hope that it will go away if you're not one of the persons, if you're not one of the kind of people that the serpents are after, or whether you try to strangle those serpents at birth. The Jewish people in the Weimar Republic of Germany of the 1920s had many, indeed millions, 6 million reasons for wishing that the foul serpents of fascism, of Nazism, which began as a music hall joke, publishing pamphlets caricaturing Jews in exactly the kind of foul ways that these jokers from Australia are characterizing Muslims today, had been stopped when they could be stopped, before they became too powerful to stop, and before they plunged the country of Germany and ultimately the world into catastrophic violence and war. That's my reason for saying the first of what may be, to some of you, a controversial point. To my astonishment, as this group of fundamentalist evangelical fanatics rose and stood in a state of rapture at these racial and religious slanders against Islam and Muslims, sitting in their midst in Wellington 3 nights ago, to his eternal shame, was the honorary consul of Israel. Shame on him for sitting in such company. On all decent Jewish people to condemn the presence of the honorary consul of Israel in a gathering of fanatics who hate Muslims today, yes, but yesterday almost certainly would have hated Jews and may again tomorrow, because whilst Muslims may be the whipping boys of fashion today, the kind of people who hate Muslims in the terms Grant expressed, hate Jews, hate black people, hate Catholics, hate whatever minority is to be whipped according to the political tastes of the day. And here I want to underscore the point which Grant made. This is not about religion. This is about white supremacy and racism. Although these people have come from Australia, their true heartland is in the Bible-belting fundamentalist south of George Bush's United States of America. These are the equivalents, yes they are, of the Ku Klux Klan in their white hoods and who also pretended to be religious people. There's nothing Christian about hating your neighbor. There's nothing Christian about hating. Christians believe in the prophets, peace be upon them. These people believe in the prophets and how to get a piece of them. That's the point. This is not about God. This is about the party of God. The party of God identified by the Bushites and the neocons as their shock troops for their neocon revolution, which is now crumbling into ashes in the United States itself. It has its imitators here in the Antipodes. This is not a clash of civilization, as if the imbecile George W. Bush represented any kind of civilization. Was building a presidential library full of dot-to-dot and colouring in books, Janet and John and pop-up volumes. I'm reminded of Mr. Gandhi, the great independence leader, in a press conference in England at the height of the Indian independence struggle, was asked by, if you'll forgive me, an American journalist, Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization? And Mr. Gandhi answered, yes, I think that would be a good idea. But of course, this hasn't come out of thin air. These Australian crazed neocons didn't wake up one morning and begin thinking about locking up their daughters from the Muslims around them. This emerges from the swamp of hatred sown in the world by the imperial policies of the United States and the tail of its attack dog, Great Britain, over these last years. This flows from the belief that somebody, God maybe, gave people like Bush and Blair the right, even the duty, to go around the world invading other people's countries, occupying them, tearing down their regimes, reinstalling puppet regimes in their own image, looting the wealth of the countries they occupy. This phenomenon flows directly from this. And if you think about it for a minute, it's perfectly obvious why. If you're going to generate the war psychosis, if you're going to justify sending your soldiers thousands of miles to invade, occupy, kill, and be killed, you must demonize the people you're attacking. There's only two ways of doing it, and they do it both ways. First of all, in the history of this kind of thing called imperialism. They said, they wrapped it up in religious, humanitarian clothes. As the Archbishop Desmond Tutu said to me once, they came to Africa, they taught us to pray with our eyes closed, and when we opened them, they'd stolen our country all around us. Some of the original people of New Zealand may recognize that description closer. To their public. Actually, we're going to, as George Orwell put it in Burmese Days, his first and most underrated novel, chatting up a girl in a rather strange chat-up line, Orwell says, through the hero Jim Florey, based on himself. Orwell was a former colonial official in Burma. Florey says, you know, imperialism is about going to other people's countries and stealing their things. But of course they don't announce it in that way. They don't gazette that they're setting off with a gunboat and an expedition to go and occupy other people's lands, to steal their things. They do it either by saying it's a humanitarian gesture to hold the hands of the savages and lead them towards the sunny uplands of freedom and democracy, or, and usually at the same time, they say we must do this because these people, the other, are some kind of threat to us. And if you do that, and if you generate that propaganda barrage and offensive, you're faced with an immediate problem. What about the millions of people, in the case of Britain, 45,000 in here in New Zealand, who share the same religion, who look the same, who perhaps have the same origin as the countries you're attacking? If you have to pump up your soldiers to attack the other, what about the other living in your own country? And as our American friend made clear, the pattern he described was crystal clear and exactly correct. You begin making war against Muslims abroad, you end in a state of war with the Muslims at home. You begin with a tour of Australian clerics, you end with your newspapers caricaturing Muslims as woman haters, gay burners, obscurantist savages who are an enemy within, in a Trojan horse that must be watched, monitored, legislated against, propagandized against, and isolated and quarantined. And of course, as in all human life, such actions bring forth an equal and opposite reaction, and you're off and running down the path that leads to exploding Muslims in the underground of London and on board London omnibuses, feeding in turn a cycle of hate which in turn produces young, bitter men ready to incinerate themselves, to kill themselves and tens, maybe scores, maybe hundreds of innocent people. Trust me, you do not want to proceed down that path. And you have no need to. You're not an empire. Don't go down the path of becoming an empire. When you decided not to join the invasion of Iraq, you were right. And it's on that basis I say you should bring your soldiers out of Afghanistan also. Mr. Blair decided to be an empire again. I come from a Scottish and Irish background. It's quite a combustible mixture, as some of you will know. When I was a child, I came home and told my Irish grandfather that the teacher had said Britain had an empire so vast that on it the sun never set. And my grandfather answered, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. Of course, our role now is as a little John Bull running around behind a giant Uncle Sam, like the sneak who runs around behind the bully, hoping to gain some of the crumbs from the table that the bully manages to extort from other people. Let me tell you that nothing I'm about to say means any kind of hatred towards the people of the United States, like the good people from the United States here in this hall this evening. I'm actually the great-grandson of the only woman in the entire 19th century who emigrated from America to Scotland. She obviously got on the wrong boat. That's what happened. We acknowledge and salute the great movement in the United States, which has brought this great neocon revolution to its knees, and hopefully in the presidential and congressional elections coming up in the next 18 months or so, will finally put the rest of the world out of its misery and kill it and bury it. The Bush neocon revolution is the biggest curse that ever afflicted the United States of America. We don't hate the United States. We don't hate the great people of the United States. Personally, I'm in favor of a special relationship with the people of the United States. I just don't want the kind of special relationship that Miss Lewinsky had with President Clinton, one-sided, unequal, undignified, and with one partner always on their knees. That's not the kind of special relationship that I want to have with the United States. You know, the swamp of hatred that I talk about will have to be drained. You can invest, if you live beside a swamp, in aerosols or fly swats. You can appoint legions of security men, policemen, intelligence men. You can buy as many mosquito nets as you please. But if you live beside a swamp, you will never stop that which emerges from a swamp as toxic as this one. The only way in which we can protect ourselves from the definitely existing threat from the bitterness and anger which is fermenting inside that swamp is to drain that swamp of the bitterness and hatred with which it's filled. And the only way to drain it is to put into reverse the processes which led to its filling with that bitterness and hatred. Sometimes, now, having spent years persecuting me, smearing me, slandering me, attacking me, they come and say to me, well, what can we do to get out of this mess? Being half an Irishman, I'm entitled to say, as the Irishman famously did when asked directions by a stranger, He said, oh, I wouldn't have started from here. And of course I wouldn't. And if they'd listened to me and to the millions of people in the anti-war movement marching in London and elsewhere around the world, we wouldn't be here. But we are. And I nonetheless, usually after saying I told you so, reveal my plan. If you give me the keys, I say, I'll take you in the U-turn that we're going to have to make if we're going to live in a world that's not consumed by hatred and bitterness and burning in flames and war and occupation around the world. There are three main parts to that plan. Some of them are easier to swallow than others. The first is indispensable. It is the heart of the matter. It is to deal with the cancer at the heart of Western policy towards the East, of the policy of the non-Muslim world towards the Muslim world. It might be painful for some of you to hear, and it's this. We have to recognize that the Palestinian people are the victims of one of the greatest crimes of the 20th century. Palestine has been wiped off the map. They're always talking, the friends of Israel, about the president of Iran threatening to wipe Israel off the map, even though, as every professor of Farsi now admits, from Tokyo to Tel Aviv, he never actually said that at all. And Iran doesn't in any case have the means of wiping Israel off the map, though Israel has the means of wiping Iran off the map. The only country which has been wiped off the map is Palestine, and its people stand for the four winds and the four corners of the earth, living as refugees, as stateless people, without passports, without rights, living in camps, persecuted, hunted from pillar to post, massacred by Israel or by the Arab regimes in the countries to which they've been scattered. And to add insult to injury, in the case of the Palestinians, they, the victims of terrorism, are called the terrorists, and Israel, the terrorists, are called the victims of terrorism. And the people, as a policy member of the international community. There's no getting away from this point until there is a modicum of justice for the Palestinians. There will be no peace in the Middle East, and if there's no peace in the Middle East, there will be no peace in the world. No justice, no peace. It's a simple equation that simply must be grasped. The second part of the plan is that we must withdraw our armies of occupation from the Muslim lands we currently occupy. There's no getting away from that either. The idea that Iraq, the great Iraq, Baghdad, with its weight in Arab and Islamic history, its importance in the world, would accept and welcome hundreds of thousands of crusader soldiers invading and occupying their country was a racist fantasy from the beginning. I told Tony Blair personally, man to man, just him and me, outside the gentleman's lavatory in the library corridor of the House of Commons, to be precise. I told him, just before he did it, the fall of Baghdad will not be the beginning of the end. It will merely be the end of the beginning, and the Iraqis will fight you with their teeth if necessary until they turn your people from their country and from their land. They will never surrender. They will never accept foreign occupation of their country, because Iraqis are not less than us. If the fascist hordes had crossed the English Channel and invaded and occupied our country, of course there would have been a class of collaborators, some of them at the time in the royal palaces. There would have been a class of politicians, some of them at the time in the Conservative Party, opposed by Churchill. There would have been a class of collaborators, yes, who would have donned the uniforms of the invader and worked as the puppet police and the puppet army of the invader. But the vast majority of decent, self-respecting Britishers would have resisted by any means necessary the foreign occupation of their country, and the Iraqis are no different to us. I told them all of this, but they did it anyway. And look what's happened. They said they were invading Iraq for freedom and democracy, and it ended in Abu Ghraib prison with naked Iraqi prisoners being led around with leashes around their necks by American women soldiers, cigarettes dangling from their lips, forced to eat their food from toilet bowls, force-fed pork and alcohol, stripped naked, piled on top of each other, forced to commit indecent acts against each other, and videotaped for the entertainment of the occupation soldiers in the barracks afterwards. That's where it ended, Mr. Bush and Mr. Blair. That's your civilization, so far as the people of Iraq are concerned. And it was all, as my brother Javed pointed out earlier, it was all based on a pack of lies. Never forget these liars who told us that Iraq was bristling with weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, just ready to fall down on our heads. Never forget the liars who told us that Iraq was involved in the act of mass murder in New York on 9/11, 2001. Never forget these liars who told us that Iraq was linked to Al-Qaeda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq before Bush and Blair invaded. There's thousands of Al-Qaeda in Iraq today, thanks to the invasion of Bush and Blair. Iraq has been shattered into 100 pieces, and that's the most painful part of all. Iraq, this great ancient civilization, becomes clear when you hear this imbecile Bush talking about Iraq. He has no idea of the civilization which he has destroyed. Iraq, where agriculture was planted for the first time, where algebra was invented, where the number zero was conceptualized, where paper was used first as a medium of communication, where laws were first codified, where 1,000 years ago, when my people were still painting their faces blue and living in the forests, Iraq had the greatest library that the world had ever seen. when the Mongol hordes of Genghis Khan sacked Baghdad 1,000 years ago, it was said that the Tigris changed colour twice in one day. First, red with the blood of the slaughtered defenders. Second, black with the ink from the books of the greatest library the world had ever seen. Bush, civilizing Iraq, is one of the most grotesque caricatures it's possible to imagine in international relations today. Three-quarters of 1 million Iraqis have been killed. According to the Johns Hopkins University, one of the most respected academic institutions in the United States, and The Lancet, the journal of the British Medical Association, said a year ago that 655,000 Iraqis had been killed in the invasion and occupation of the country. Bush and Blair said they were lying. You can make your mind up whether you believe John Hopkins and The Lancet or Tony Blair and George W. Bush. I know who I believe. 4 million Iraqis are now living as refugees, half of them begging on the streets of Amman and Damascus, half of them sheltering in the homes of others as they are ethnically cleansed from one district to another. Iraq has been painted crimson red with blood. The rivers Tigris and the Euphrates are floating with bloated bodies. The morgues cannot contain the bodies piling up every day. Girls can't set foot on the street for fear of being raped and kidnapped and killed. Academics, professors, doctors, surgeons flee or are murdered by death squads. This is one of the biggest disasters ever visited by any government on the world at any time in history. And these criminals, these mass killers, Bush and Blair, still have no remorse, none whatsoever, for that which they've done. And in a move which must be the most grotesque appointment since Caligula appointed his horse a proconsul of Rome, Tony Blair is now the peace envoy of the international community to the Middle East. And then there's Afghanistan. What did the poor Afghans do? No Afghan ever harmed any Britisher, except for the 3 British armies who occupied Afghanistan and left their bones in their thousands up the Khyber Pass, in the mountains and on the plains of Afghanistan. There were no Afghans on those airplanes on 9/11. No Afghan ever harmed any American. And yet the poorest country in the world was savagely bombarded mercilessly by the richest and most powerful countries in the world, principally his and mine, but now joined in occupation by yours. And I tell you, it's not only immoral what we've done to Afghanistan, it's doomed to failure. Nobody ever successfully occupied Afghanistan, not even Alexander the Great. And Helen Clark, you know Alexander the Great. As a matter of fact, not only did the Afghans never harm us, we harmed them. They're being occupied today because of the presence in their country, in the mountains, of the Al-Qaeda Bin Laden phenomenon. that my enemy's enemy is my friend. Well, your enemy's enemy isn't always your friend. Sometimes your enemy's enemy is worse than your enemy. And these people didn't read Dr. Frankenstein's story to the end. The point of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was that once the monster had been created, it was no longer under the control of its creator. That's why it's a monster, because it cannot be controlled. And this phenomenon, which we sent into Afghanistan, gave guns and money, has spread around the world to haunt us, not the least on 9/11 in New York in 2001. And of course, the jihad that's being fought in Iraq today, the battle-hardened veterans of which will fan out around the world to harm us in the years to come, is exactly the problem which Bush and Blair constantly fret about, but who have done so much to make worse. I said in the House of Commons just a few days after 9/11, if we handle this the wrong way, we'll create 10,000 new Bin Ladens. In fact, we've created hundreds of thousands of new Bin Ladens by the way that we have created this. And the double standard is so bitterly obvious. The Sky News interview that Javed talked about earlier, that I did last August, became memorable through YouTube and the rest, because I dealt with this question of double standards. How the blood of some people in this world is more valuable than the blood of others. And the blood of Afghans is the cheapest of all. Mrs. Bush and Mrs. Blair, in a synchronized radio address on the anniversary of 9/11, urged us never to forget those heartbreaking messages of love and farewell left by those American women on those aeroplanes from their mobile telephones on the answering machines of their loved ones, as if we ever could forget them. But as I said at the time, just because Afghan women don't have mobile telephones and Iraqi women don't have answering machines, it doesn't make their deaths delivered from the sky any less obscene than the deaths of those American women on those airplanes on 9/11. And the third part of the plan has to be this. We must stop propping up the puppet presidents and the corrupt kings who rule the Muslim world almost without exception from one end to the other. People ask me, maybe some people tonight, what should we do about dictators in other people's countries? I say all we have to do about dictators in other people's countries is stop arming the dictators, stop supporting the dictators, and their own people will bring them down, crashing to the ground. That's what we should do about dictators. We instead give them everything that they need in order to perform their part of the Faustian pact they have made with us, whereby we will keep them in power in exchange for them, give or take 20 or 30% in their own pockets, allow us to loot their countries. We say we're fighting for liberty and freedom in Iraq, when in the country next door, the so-called Saudi Arabia, the kleptocratic tyranny there, which has crushed freedom and liberty absolutely loots its country of trillions of dollars and spends it in the bordellos and the casinos and the arms bazaars of the West in a bizarre recycling of petrodollars. There's a man, some of you will have heard of him. They call him now President Musharraf. There was a time, just a few weeks before his election, George Bush didn't even know who he was. He was interviewed just before the election. They asked him, Mr. President, your experience of foreign affairs is limited. Do you know some of the people that you'll have to deal with? Like, for example, the President of Pakistan. Bush answered, yes, we know him. The General. The interviewer pressed, can you be a little more specific? Maybe his name or something. Bush smiled shyly, as well he might, and said, we just call him the General. And of course, Bush was right. That's all he was, just a general who appointed himself as president. So outraged were we at his military coup. We put him on the blacklist of the Commonwealth. We imposed an arms embargo. We said, you'll not be back in civilized company until you make way for democratically elected government in Pakistan. After 9/11, the general became a president, and his mouth was stuffed with money and guns and everything that he required. And look what's happened now. Pakistan trembles on the abyss of total breakdown. Whose finger will be on Pakistan's nuclear trigger tomorrow, next month, in 6 months? Nobody knows, least of all the Americans and the British, who propped up the tyrant until the last minute before he came crashing down, as he will any day, any week, any month now. You may not know that even Colonel Gaddafi has now been recruited to the forces of freedom, democracy, and liberty. That's the same Colonel Gaddafi that we said brought down the Pan American airliner over Lockerbie, killing hundreds of people, many of them my compatriots. That's the same Colonel Gaddafi that we said financed the IRA's bombing campaign in Britain in the 1970s and 80s. The Colonel Gaddafi, we said, was a madman and a tyrant, crushing liberty and freedom in his country. His soldiers are now being trained at Sandhurst Military Academy in England. His intelligence service is being trained, God help them, at the British SIS. Does anybody really believe that Gaddafi changed? Or did he just change sides? Everybody knows Gaddafi was a tyrant before. He's a tyrant today. The difference is he's our tyrant today, and he wasn't our tyrant yesterday. That's the difference. These hypocrites in London and Washington are not against dictators. They're only against dictators who don't obey orders. And what do they imagine? The Muslim people of the world, the 1.8 billion Muslims, most of whom live under the iron heel of these tyrants. What do they think those Muslims think when they hear Bush and Blair and Howard? I mean, if we're the tail of the dog, what's John Howard? I don't like to say in polite company. When they hear Howard and Blair and Bush talking about liberty, They don't know whether to laugh or cry. They don't know whether to laugh or cry when the tyrants who oppress them do so only because of the unlimited military, political, diplomatic and financial support of the countries preaching about liberty and freedom. We started out talking about a group of lunatics from Australia who sailed across the sea to stir up hatred in New Zealand. And we've ended on these great global, strategic, political, military questions. But they're not disconnected.
Named War on Terror, begun by Washington to monopolise oil fields in the Muslim Middle East as part of the US state's strategy to remain the world's dominant power. As a prominent anti-war politician, George Galloway was targeted by a US black propaganda campaign in an attempt to blacken his reputation as a grassroots advocate. Falsely accused of being in the pay of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, Galloway demanded to testify before the US Senate in May 2005. There he turned the tables against the powerful elites profiting from death and destruction in the Middle East, putting them on trial for crimes against humanity. In March this year, British enforcement authorities admitted that George Galloway had no case to answer. Galloway is one of the West's most high-profile opponents of Islamophobia. In his Auckland meetings, Galloway pointed to the close link between America's wars in the Middle East and its state-fueled Islamophobia, which attempts to give ideological justification to Washington's unjust crusade for oil and power. Born in 1954...
But I've enjoyed it immensely. And I want to begin by complimenting New Zealand. I have a national radio show on British radio every Friday and Saturday night, London time, between 10 in the evening and 1 in the morning. You can listen to it on the internet, as many people now do around the world. More than 1 million people listen to this show every weekend, and I did it from Auckland this morning. And if you'd heard it, maybe some of you did, your hearts would have been warmed by the extent to which it is regarded as a universal truth that New Zealand is a peaceful and harmonious and decent society.
That as New Zealanders, as people in a global community, as a brotherhood, that we should be tolerant, accepting and understanding. These are the building blocks of the future. This is what will lay the path of the future generation. And what better example than to set it right here in Aotearoa. With those words, viewers, let's cross over to British MP George Galloway.
George Galloway, left-wing British MP and international peace campaigner, was here in Auckland last July to speak against Islamophobia at meetings organised by RAM, the Residents' Action Movement. A prime catalyst for the Voices of Peace meetings was the Mosques and Miracles tour, organised in New Zealand around the same time to spread the message of Islamophobia. The Mosques and Miracles tour has been inspired by a 400-page book of the same name, written by Australian right-wing Baptist pastor Stuart Robinson. Galloway defines Islamophobia as racism against Muslims. This new racism, says the British MP, is an inevitable flow-on from the deliberately
Kia ora, wā mai and greetings viewers. Welcome back to Darpa in the Mirror, a panorama of images New Zealand capturing you and the world around us. Now, Happy New Year's to you all. New Zealand has turned on a magnificent Kiwi summer for the last few days. It's been an absolute cracker. You can tell by just looking at me that I've been practically barbecued out in the sun. So it's been absolutely fantastic, and once again, Happy New Year's to you all. Now today's show, viewers, is dominated by keynote speaker and British MP George Galloway. Now George Galloway is renowned the world over for his stinging counterattacks in the defence of Islam, his purity, his unbiasedness, and his surreal words are thought-provoking and have accredited him with praise the world over. Now, he attracted a record crowd of over 1,200 people in 2 days in Auckland. Now, this in comparison and echoing the sentiments of Ram of his counterparts, which organised the Mosques and Miracles. These were a group of Australian Islamophobes, as Ram labelled, who were trying to incite race hate. Now, it is important before we cross over to George Galloway.
In Dundee, at the age of 26, he was chairman of Labour in Scotland. At 32, he was in the House of Commons, beating Roy Jenkins in Glasgow's Hillhead, a Tory stronghold for generations. He is an excellent orator who captures people's imagination and commands respect.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Fellow parliamentarians, distinguished guests, distinguished elders, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, wassalamu alaikum, peace be with all of you. I'm very grateful indeed for the warm welcome I have had in New Zealand, in the 12 or 13 media interviews that I've done, in this, the second of the major meetings and speeches that I've been able to make here in a whirlwind visit of just 3 or 4 days. It's a long way to come for a week.